Hi everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Hackertech Enhancing Problem Solving Skills and Innovative Abilities. This webinar is brought to you by Jewel Digital Ventures and 1337 Ventures in partnership with ASNB. I'm Wayan and I'll be your host for today. Our speaker for this session is Arvin Rahman, Head of Product Design at Jewel Digital Ventures. Arvin spearheads a specialized team to handle the design of products to meet the requirements and needs of the customers. His vast experience make him an expert in turning and simplifying complex problems. A die-hard designer and product thinker at heart, he believes that design is at the core of every product ever created. Arvin is responsible for designing the user experience in the My ASNB app. Arvin is dedicated to crafting great user experiences through empathy, observation, understanding of technology, and design sprints, as well as to ensure that the product will be excellent for its user. In today's session, you'll be learning more about the Hackathon FinTech problem statements, how to define and understand your user segments, and how to pick the right solution. If you have any questions for Arvin, please do not hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A box located at the right-hand side of your screen, and we will be addressing them at the end of the session. On to you, Arvin.
All right. Hello, everyone. Quick mic check. Can you guys hear me? Can you guys see me? I think we're good. Okay, cool. Let me cast my screen and we can get started. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for making time for this event. Today, we're going to be going through quite a few things, but I want to simplify it by just highlighting a few key problems that'll help all of you here, not only with this hackathon, but moving forward as well in terms of product thinking and product designing, right? And eventually product building. So with that being said, there are two areas that I would like to share with you guys today. One is the what of things, and the other one is the how of things, right? And these are all related to the fintech space. And obviously all of this applies directly to the hackathon that you guys are participating in, right? So that being said, if there are any questions, do feel free to ask, but I think majority of the Q&A will be handled towards the end of this talk. But feel free to ask for clarifications along the way if you need them, right? Okay, let's start with the first statement, which is what you need to know, right? Now, this is in context, obviously, of the hackathon and the problem statement, but also I'd like to cover the bigger picture as well in terms of where the fintech space is at today and what you need to know about your potential fintech users, right? Okay, first, before we start, let us have a quick look at the problem statements that are assigned to this hackattack. They are segmented into 6 different areas, but as I'll go through them, you'll see that there's overlaps between a few of them, and some of them are more niche, or some of them are a bit more broad. Now, this is to allow you guys to kind of express your own take on this, and as well as to have a diverse portfolio of solutions, right? Okay, so one of the first and most prominent problem statements today in the fintech industry in Malaysia specifically is financial literacy, right? So to summarize that, how might we encourage financial skills, including personal finance management, budgeting, and investing to our users, right? Now, a lot of times, especially with investing and finances, it's such a jarring field that people feel that the barrier to entry is very high, right? And a lot of that has to do with how financially literate the population is, meaning how well do we understand the concept of finances, right? And that goes all the way from savings to your wealth management, to your investment portfolio, and so on and so forth, right? So it's a spectrum of information that we are trying to educate to the community, right? So that's one of the biggest problem statements that we face today. And that kind of, you can see the effect of that problem statement in multiple different areas of fintech as well, right? So we'll come back on that. Moving on from there, the second problem statement is financial democratization. Now, what that basically means is giving access to financial services to those who might not have had access to it prior. And that includes communities such as the B40 or the disabled community, or communities that are perhaps not your typical demographic for fintech solutions. So it kind of forces us to think a bit outside the box and to look at fintech as a tool, a set of tools that's not only accessible to the elite or to the financially literate, but how do we democratize that? How do we make sure that we give everyone equal access to these tools that we're trying to build, right? That solve these fintech problems within the industry. That's a very interesting problem statement. The third one is financial adoption. Now, this is addressing more towards how do we incorporate fintech into different areas of our lives, right? So that might be how might we educate users on the availability of investment types and products, and also how do we empower them to start their own investment journey, right? So just because you're aware of something doesn't mean you're actually adopting it into your life as well. So that's another challenge that comes within the industry, which is fintech adoption, which we find that Malaysia specifically is relatively low at the moment, right? So we do want to address that. Okay. The other three set of problem statements are as follows. Now you can see these are a bit more niche. So we started from something that is a bit more broad, and we're zooming into specific areas now of your personal wealth management is one of it, right? So how might we support users with personalized investment advice or management services that are tailored to their specific individual needs, right? We've come to the age of instant gratification, and we've come to the age of personalization as well. So how do we incorporate those things in the fintech realm? I think a lot of interesting solutions can come out of that, right? Next, we have complementary services. So how can we promote financial inclusion through various other products and features that are perhaps not directly in the chain of fintech, right? How do we expand the arms and legs of fintech to be included in other aspects of life so the entire ecosystem increases in size, so to speak, right? It's a very abstract problem to think about. And then lastly, how do we reimagine engagement? As I mentioned earlier, we have a phenomena where people feel like fintech is something that is very hard to wrap their heads around, right? Because there's a lot of jargon and there's a lot of misconception and there's a lot of fear around fintech as well in general, because it's an emerging industry, right? So how do we reimagine engagement? How do we reimagine a person's interaction with these services and solutions, right? So how can we promote better mindsets? And a few common examples are gamification and habitual creating patterns, right? That might be a few interesting areas to look into. Okay, so we've covered 6 of the, I would say, the most prominent problem statements that we have in the industry today. Now, let's switch our views into who are we building these solutions for, right? We've taken a look at what the problems are. Now let's look at who is affected by these problems, or who are we creating these solutions for. Now we're going to take a look at 4 different user personas, right? And what these personas mean is basically, think of it as your categorization of your general population, right? And we've categorized them into 4 different buckets. And each of these buckets tell us a little bit more about what this person's background is, what their motivations are, what their frustrations are, and how they behave, right? Along with some key attributes that'll help us kind of identify where this person's risk tolerance is or financial literacy is. And then lastly, we're going to look at some demographic facts as well to kind of paint a holistic picture of this user type, right? So the first user type that you're looking at is resilient Rizal. Essentially, the area that I would like everyone to focus on is basically the attributes, right? Because this defines quite a bit of the mindset of this user persona. So you can see for Rizal, his tech savviness is on the lower scale of the spectrum, right? So not that very much tech savvy. And the same goes for financial literacy, right? Perhaps haven't been introduced to a lot of financial concepts yet. So they're a bit unaware of the jargon that comes with the industry, right? And that is reflected heavily on their product knowledge, right? Which means that users who fall under this category have extremely low product knowledge, has very low tech savviness, i.e. their ability to use smartphones and tech devices and apps and so on and so forth. And their financial literacy is also quite low. And that is also reflected within their risk tolerance, right? So the less I know about the industry, the less I know about the product, the less aware I am about technology, the more risk averse I will be, right? The less likely I am to take higher risks. And that is reflected in his attribute as well. And also in the sense of what would be this user's investment time horizon, right? So are we looking at someone in this category who does short-term investments or long-term investments, right? So for an attribute such as Rizals, we tend to see users opt for longer time horizons, meaning that their investments, if they choose to make one, despite their fear and lack of product knowledge, would tend to be more for the longer term, right? So we're looking at anywhere from 7 to 20 years of investment period. Now, these attributes really help us understand what the user's mindset is at and what their awareness and exposure is to this industry, right? You can have a deeper look at the frustrations and the behaviors. Essentially, these are the two problems that we try and solve when we're building product, right? With their motivation in mind, obviously, like why are they even using fintech products in the first place, or why might they be using fintech products in the first place? And what are their biggest fears about the industry or about using such technology, right? And how can we address those fears as we are building our solutions? Moving on from Resilient Horizon, we have Simplicity. I'll quickly go over the attributes as well to kind of give you guys an idea. For her tech savviness is quite on the high end of the spectrum. So she's very fluent with technology, is able to use apps, and probably is on all your well-known social media apps already. However, her financial literacy is still on the lower end of the spectrum. Product knowledge is reflective of that, which is extremely low. She's probably someone who's never really invested before. But her risk tolerance is on the higher side of things because she's a bit more tech savvy. She's a bit more trusty in terms of the online technologies and solutions that are available. And the time horizon is also in the middle. So it's less on the long period. It's more on 3 to 5 years investment horizon, right? And this is, of course, just a generalization of this user category, but it kind of helps us distinguish different user segments, right? And we'll see down the talk why that's very important for us when we're building a product. Why must we think about user segments, and why must we think about who we are building the products for? Okay, moving on from there, we have Techie Tony, right? So demographic-wise, young, 25-year-old undergrad, fresh out of uni. And that is also very reflective in their attributes, right? So you have Techie Tony is extremely tech savvy. Again, financial literacy is relatively low. And you can sort of see a picture now here between the problem statements mentioned earlier and the majority of our population here today and where they categorize within the spectrum of financial literacy, right? It is relatively low for a good chunk of the population. And that is also reflected in the user segments that we have studied and are conveying here to you guys, right? Product knowledge is also relatively low, but risk tolerance is quite high for a user category of Techie Tony, right? They're more willing to take risks. They're more willing to make shorter bets. And that is also reflective in the time horizon that you see here, right? They are more of the category of going in and out really quick, short-time investments, short-time solutions, quick gains, quick wins, right? So think of your cryptos, your NFT players. Their tech savviness is quite high, but their time horizon is relatively low because they're looking to go in and out of the market relatively quickly, right? So we're seeing this user segment emerge from the market quite heavily in the past 5 years, right? And we can sort of see the market being dominated by a lot of this type of user segments moving forward as well. Okay, lastly, we have enthusiast Arman. Now he's quite interesting because users who fall within this category are extremely tech savvy and they're also financially literate, right? So they fall within the minority of the user segment that are actually educated about fintech and they understand the nuances of investing and they understand the jargon that comes with the industry as well. That's also reflected in their product knowledge. They're quite aware of the products that are out there. So think of fintech solutions like decentralized banking or robo-advisory and solutions of that nature. This user category is quite aware of those products as well. So it's slightly easier to communicate to them. But the challenge there is now how do we communicate up to their expectations, right? Because these users are not laymen, they are kind of aware of what is available in the industry. So they're more savvy in that sense, right? And their risk tolerance is reflective of that too. Like, I'm aware of the industry, I'm aware of the products that are out there, I'm financially literate, so I'm more likely to take higher risks when I'm playing within this industry, right? And their time horizon it tends to fall on the shorter end of the spectrum, right? So we're looking at short to medium term investors here. So to quickly summarize, right, what we just went through are four different user categories or user personas that try and capture the market that's available here today and kind of paint a picture of what type of users are interacting with finance or fintech in general, right? And where are their headspaces at and what are their attributes? So when you're crafting your solutions, you can take this into account to see which user personas or which user segments relate more or fit more with your product that you're coming from. And that's the product market fit that we often talk about whenever we're trying to build or launch a new product, right? Okay, I want to kind of divert your attention to some facts, right, within the industry now. So we kind of get a picture of where the industry is as a whole, right? So we've looked at the problem statements, we've looked at the people who are affected by the problem statements. Now let's zoom out again and look at the industry and the Malaysian population in general to kind of get an idea of what the bigger picture here is that we're trying to solve, right? So more than 30% of all Malaysians currently live paycheck to paycheck. So that should tell you a few things about the investment mindset of people or the scarcity mindset of people, right? And how there's an emerging problem within that field. These statistics were extremely shocking, but they kind of paint, again, a very clear picture of where the problems lie today, right? You can see that there's a massive problem in terms of saving, and that could be because of the lack of financial literacy or accessibility to financial solutions, right? Or this perceived barrier to entry to investment. Oftentimes, we feel like we can only invest once we have broken a certain benchmark, but that is one of the biggest misconceptions about investment, right? You can start investing for as little as a cup of coffee, right? And that's the kind of mindset that we are also trying to change. But it's very important for us to be aware of what the market is thinking and where the industry is at today. This is a very interesting fact. We can see now that a certain user category is emerging more and more in the market. Remember earlier I mentioned about Techie Tony. We can see users of that segment clearly dominating the market today. So that also kind of paint a picture for you in terms of where your solutions are to hit and what type of users you're dealing with, right, as you craft these solutions. Okay, we have taken a look at what you need to know, right? Now, this is the practical fun part. Now, this is what you need to do. What you need to do in order of understanding the problem statements and crafting your solutions, but also what you need to do in terms of creating products in the future, right? That might not even fall under fintech, but general principles and tools. Some of these concepts might already be familiar to you, but if it's not, feel free to dig deeper into it. If something inspires you or interests you, you can also ask questions towards the end of this talk, and I'll be happy to clarify that. Okay, the first rule of product building is to fall in love with the problem. I cannot stress how important this is because oftentimes we tend to jump into the solutioning straight away. And you'd see if you're working in a group of 5 or 4 people, have a quick exercise and ask everyone what they think the problem they're trying to solve is. Oftentimes you'll find that not everyone is aligned on solving the same problem, right? It's a misconception that we have. So it's extremely important to align everyone on exactly what problem you're solving and spend enough time on truly understanding the nuances of the problem. This will really, really, really help you craft solutions that are much more effective and that get you where you want to go much faster, right? Falling in love with the problem is the first step of product building. And how we do that, I mean, there's multiple ways of doing that. One of the ways I like to promote is by crafting a vision statement, right? What that looks like or sounds like is essentially what will the world look like after you have solved this problem? I always try to think about airports. I love traveling and I go to airports quite a lot, and there's always a long queue, right? When you're trying to collect your baggage or when you're trying to check in through immigration. Now imagine a vision statement where the queue from landing to checkout is only 5 minutes, right? What would a world look like when you can enter and exit an airport in 5 minutes? These are vision statements. They're meant to be aspirational, but they're meant to also align you on the solution as well as on the problem, right? So a few practical ways you can practice this within this hackathon is by asking yourself, our vision is a world where XYZ problems are solved, right? Or our vision is a world where 90% of the Malaysian population is financially literate, right? Or our vision is a world where financial solutions are available to all categories of workers, right? Or our vision is to be the number one go-to source for personalized wealth advice, right? So try and craft a vision statement. You'll see that this is extremely helpful in aligning everyone into the North Star, and it'll just make the process a lot smoother, right? Okay, second key step of building products is to know your target. You must know who you're building your products for. And that goes much deeper than just understanding your user segment, but it's to really empathize with the users that you're building your products for, right? Oftentimes in the industry, we talk about who's your target audience, and the answer is often everyone. And that's a very dangerous target audience to have, right? And oftentimes, obviously, we want to build product that target the masses because that's the quickest way to get adoption, right? But oftentimes, what ends up happening is when you try and please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. So don't be afraid of the niche. Go deep into the niche. You'd be surprised how large the niche actually is, right? So what does that mean? How do you get there? A few things like we like to practice here when we're thinking about building products. Number one is empathy mapping. Essentially, it's a way to collaborate and collect data and visualize what your users are saying, thinking, feeling, and doing. It's a great way to empathize with their users and actually understand what their pain points are, what their frustrations are, what their demands are, what their needs are, which really helps you craft solutions that are more suitable for them, right? So you might find yourself spending some time, even during this hackathon, talking to some people and trying to understand what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're doing, and how they're feeling in terms of fintech and your solution that you're trying to propose, right? We'll have a deeper look at it in a second. The second one is affinity mapping. Now, this is a really quick way and a collaborative way to gather and sort and categorize information, right? So say you're interviewing 20 people, and you're asking them a specific question about your solution, or you're trying to investigate who your target segment is, and you're asking a bunch of specific questions about your target segment. What affinity mapping is, it's a really quick way of helping you categorize and bucket those answers, right? So you can start to see a pattern emerge. And in product building, patterns are extremely important because that's when we know that something is repeating, something needs your attention, and perhaps something that you can capitalize on, right? So perhaps after this talk, if you're interested in any of these, have a deeper search. These are tools that we often use here to kind of help us build better and better products, right? But let's have a quick look at empathy mapping. I think this is something that is extremely valuable and perhaps something you guys can do even within the span of this hackathon, right? So there are a few parts to empathy mapping. The first one is thinking and feeling. What that basically means is what are the major misconceptions or conceptions that the users even have about your solution or product, right? What are their worries? What are their aspirations? What really counts? What really matters to them? So why would they even use this tool? At the end of the day, whatever we build is essentially a tool to solve a particular problem, right? So how do they think and feel about that problem, and why would they even care to use this tool is a great place to start for you to understand where the mindset is at, right? Next is, what do they see? Where, like, their environments? What does the market offer? What are their friends using, right? So if everyone's on a particular solution or app or platform, it's more likely for users to buy into it, right? Because social proof is the biggest proof that we have as humans, right? And oftentimes it's very important to list those things out so you can not only see your competitors, but also see your opportunities as well to collaborate or to market through, right? So the C part is also very important. What they hear, right? So what's the chat around the solution like? What's the conception? So if you're building an AI robot to do investing for you, what are people saying about AI robots? What are people saying about investing through bots online, right? What do your friends think about it? What are influencers saying within the industry, right? And that's important to know because that shapes a lot of our behavior, right? Which again ties back to your solution, right? Because your solution must fit within a user's behavior, not necessarily disrupt it, right? Say and do. What's their attitude like about these solutions, right? Are they completely anti fintech solutions? Do they still diehard believe in over-the-counter traditional banks? brokers, or are they open to trying out new things? And if so, why not, right? So these things are, again, important to know for you to paint a bigger picture, a more clearer picture of the target audience that your solution is aiming to solve problems for, right? Lastly, the two very, very important parts of empathy mapping is pains and gains. Now, this is where your product will shine the most, because that is what we try and address when we're building solutions, right? We try and address the pain points of our users, and we try and emphasize their gains by using our solutions, right? So simply put, what are their fears around it, right? Is security a problem for them? Is privacy a problem for them? Is jargon a problem for them, right? Try and understand what their pain points are and what their frustrations are, right? Have they tried these solutions before that didn't work for them? What didn't work for them, right? Which part did they not understand? Which part did they feel lost in? So it's very, very important to understand their frustrations as well as obstacles, right? Again, was the language that was used to technically enhance, right? Was that difficult for people to understand what the concept that you were trying to explain was? Was it access that was an obstacle for them, right? Was it a barrier to entry in terms of investment amount and things of that nature, right? So it's really, really important to understand their pains, and feel free to dig as deep as you can, trying to understand their pain points, because the effectiveness of your solution heavily relies on it. And then lastly, gains, right? What are their needs? What are their wants? What do they want out of this tool that you're providing them, right? What are they expecting out of their tools? And how do they measure the successfulness of these tools? Now, it's also extremely important that the solution you create has this into mind, because if I don't see that your tool is benefiting me in the way that you promised that it benefits me, I'll stop finding it useless. I'll start finding it useless. I'll stop finding it useful, right? So it's very important to know what your gains are, what your users' perceived gains are from using this particular tool, right? So if you're promising a habit-changing app that allows them to save more for a specific goal that they might have, i.e., maybe retirement, or they're trying to buy a house, then it's important to create something that users can track and actually measure their progress in, so they can see the effectiveness of your tools, right? That's just one example. I'm sure you guys can think of many more. Okay. I know we're covering a lot, but we're almost at the end. Lastly, the last bit of information I'd like to share with you guys is the importance of testing, right? So we've looked at why it's important to fall in love with the problem. Then we've looked at how do you understand your users better and how do you empathize with them better so your solutions can be more effective. Now let's look at how do we pick the right solution, right? At this stage, you're probably thinking, okay, I think this problem can be solved by doing X, Y, and Z. But which one of these options is the best option, right? And simply put, the right option is, or the right solution is the one that is tested. And that's what we believe in product thinking, right? We believe in rapidly testing your solutions to see which ones are actually effective and which ones aren't. So how do you do that? Well, there's a few ways to test your products. There's a qualitative way, there's a quantitative way, and there's A/B testing. Here at Jewel, we pretty much use all available options to test whatever solution we're trying to create, depending on the circumstances and the scope of the solution. Personally, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about testing. Testing, I think, is often looked at as something that is very cumbersome and takes a very long time. And often the reason why we don't really test our solutions. And that could not be far from reality, right? Oftentimes here, we don't spend months and months doing user research or testing. We'll spend a few days to sometimes even a few hours running real quick A/B testing within our user group, or speaking to a handful of users and doing qualitative testing, right? Meaning you sit down with a particular set of users and you ask them meaningful questions that allow you to understand where your product comes short and where your product is succeeding, right? Are they able to do the jobs to be done that your product is promising them? Or are they failing to do that? And you can really get a lot of information by just asking 5 people, right? That's the magic number for rapid testing. And then we have your quantitative testing, which I'm sure everyone here has participated in at some point. Is essentially a survey, right? So if you're curious on high-level solution filtering and you want to know which solution has more weightage, you can quickly send out a survey as well, and this can hit as many people as you like in your database, right? And get quick answers from that. And then lastly, there's A/B testing, which is something extremely practical. Say you are confused between two different flows or two different solutions or two different copies or two different buttons. It can be as detailed as you would like or as bigger picture as you like. And the idea here is you simply show your users these two different versions and see which one they gravitate towards, and then ask them why to kind of get their rationale. And at the end of that, you'll have a report of not only choices, but also the rationale behind the choices that, again, should help you craft your solutions better, right? There's a lot more than these three ways to test your products. I won't get into all of them now, but I think some of these things you guys can look into, which are quite interesting, depending on the scope of the solution that you're trying to test. Some of my favorites, again, are usability testing. This is where you essentially list out a series of tasks that you want the user to complete, and you observe as they are completing the tasks on how successful they are in completing the tasks, right? That should give you an idea of how effective your solutions are that you're designing, or also paint a picture in terms of where your solutions fall short, right? And where you need to kind of amend and address those problems within your solutions. There's other more technical tests like eye tracking. There's tools that can help you do that as well. So you can see exactly where your users are navigating through and how they're going through your flows and your products as you're designing and building them. That kind of gives you an idea of legibility of things, and are they looking in the direction that you want them to look. There's also rapid testing, such as gorilla testing. This is an extremely fun one to do. Say you have a solution or a sketch of a solution or a concept. It's simply the act of going around to asking, again, 3 to 5 strangers, hey, what do you think about this concept? What do you understand of the sketch or the solution, right? So again, what I'm trying to paint a picture of here is how easy it can be to test your products, right? It doesn't have to be complicated at all. And yet it is extremely valuable in terms of filtering the right solution, right? Okay. So let's do a quick recap. I know we went through quite a bit of context. We had a look at what you need to know. So we had a look at the problem statements, the user personas, and the market status, essentially understanding the industry from a larger point of view. And then what we need to do when we're crafting solutions or building products, right? We need to fall in love with the problem statement. We need to define and understand our user segments. And lastly, we need to test to find the right solutions, right? With that, I'll leave you with a final quote that I found to be very, very true. Oftentimes when we're creating products, right, we look at it as who can we sell our products to, but rather who finds our products useful, right? So essentially what you should be thinking about is trying not to find customers for your product, but find products for your customers. And that mindset shift should help you craft solutions that are truly desirable in the market, right? Okay, so with that, I think I'll pass on to the Q&A section of things. If there are any questions or if you guys want any clarifications, happy to share that with you guys. Okay, I see a bunch of questions here. Let me refresh the vote. Okay, Wayne, do you want to flash the questions?
Yes. All right. We have a question here by Chintat. Whether we should plan our solution to best fit the existing legal framework or plan for a better solution without considering legal issues.
Interesting. Okay. So in product thinking, right, oftentimes we have a saying called blue sky thinking, basically, which means you build your solutions as if there are no restrictions at all in the world, right? And then we go through a series of feasibility tests, which essentially ground us back to reality from the solution that we created using blue sky thinking, right? So it's a very common approach we use here, because oftentimes we tend to limit ourselves even before the limitations are actualized to us, right? And now in the case of legal issues, it might be a bit more concrete. But again, in product thinking, we like to go with blue sky, meaning when you're building a solution, try and think of no limitations in the beginning. and then do a series of feasibility tests, right, to see, okay, is my solution actually applicable, right? Can I now consider the legal issues that might come around it, or the technical issues that I need to consider? Is this solution possible to even build, or how much do I need to invest to build the solution, right? So start with blue sky and then bring yourself back to reality. I think that's the approach I would advise.
All right, thank you so much for that, Arvin. We have a next question by Joshua Lim. What are the different ways to validate a customer persona?
Very good question. Okay. There's a few ways you can validate customer personas. There's a qualitative way and a quantitative way, right? If you're using tools to track your product, such as Google Analytics or Mixpanel or CleverTap, and there's a series of tools out there that you can use to track your product. That's one way to validate through data. So you can see if the user segments match the behavior that you have previously identified with your user personas. Another way of doing it is the softer way of doing it, which is essentially keep the cycle of user persona going. Now, the misconception with user personas that we have is that it's static, right? You define your personas once and that's it. You don't come back to it for years, and you're creating products specifically for those personas. Oftentimes, what ends up happening is your personas get outdated. People grow, people change constantly, right? And that's no different for our customers too. Their needs, their desires, their wants, their frustrations keep updating as well. So the best way to validate your customer personas is to not think about your personas as something that's static, but rather something that you need to update, say every quarter, right? If you have the capacity, or every year at least, if you have the capacity. And how you do that is, again, by creating a customer persona, again, from what you know and from what you perceive, to see what the discrepancies or what the delta is between your existing user persona and the one that you're revisiting or creating again, right? That should kind of give you and the closer the delta is, the more valid or validated your customer personas are, right? So those are kind of the two ways we like to do it here.
Great, thanks so much for that, Arvin. Hope that answers your question, Joshua. Next up, we have a question from Shen Chun. Is the profitability of the solution a consideration?
Yes, it's a tricky one, right? Because as we know, most startups today are not profitable. Most unicorns take so long to become profitable, right? So initially, I think we always like to think of profitability again as part of the feasibility check, right? Consideration, I think that's something that you should consider, if it's even feasible to make profitable, to make the solution profitable. But oftentimes, at least within our experience, we have seen that profitability comes from revenue channels that you don't initially plan for, right? You might assume that this product will give you profitability if you create it this way, but as you create the product and as it matures, more avenues pop up, right? More revenue streams pop up that you might have not initially considered. So I guess my 2 cents here would be, don't let the profitability stop you from creating a solution, but do consider it when you're running your feasibility check, right? But again, when you're crafting a solution, the only primary thing that your solution should aim to address are the problems and the frustrations that your users are facing, right? And then from there, you scale it back with feasibility checking to see if it's profitable, if it's doable, if it's technically feasible, and so on and so forth, right? Yeah, hope that answers that.
Thank you. Moving on, our next question. How do we build products or solutions to make the older ones adopt digital? How do we close the digital divide?
That's a tough one, because that's what we are all trying to do at some level, right? We're trying to democratize technology here, right? Now, this is not about specific solutions, but technology as a whole, right? Now, how do we design and craft products that communicate to all levels of tech savviness, right? When we're talking about the older ones, we're talking about folks perhaps who are not that technically savvy, who are not very familiar with using apps on their phone, or web solutions on their desktops, right? So when we're designing these solutions, again, it's important to know your target demo. And if you know your target is targeting folks that are less technically savvy, then your solutions need to account for that, right? Meaning the language that you use, the UX UI that you use might need to be specifically tailored for that. I think it's mainly about knowing who your target audience is, right? And how well you can attend to their needs. Oftentimes, again, we talk about targeting the masses, and then this is a clear reflection of how perhaps that doesn't take into account specific niche target audiences, right? And how their solutions might vary from someone else. Going back to the user personas, how someone such as Techie Tony's solutions might vary from Resilient Risel's, right? Not only because of the age difference, but also because of the tech savviness, the difference there, and as well as product knowledge, right? So it's really about knowing who your target audience is actually, um, and then creating solutions that fit that. Hope that answers that question.
Moving on, now we have another question. Whether, as a startup focusing on a specific niche, how can they incorporate the older traditional solutions for a target market that isn't so keen on globalization?
Specific, specifically, how do we incorporate old traditional solutions? Well, technology in its essence is disruptive to some point, right? From a user behavioral point of view, what we noticed is for your product to have the most optimal adoption, we mustn't go against the user behavior, but rather somehow fit with it, right? I think technology is just meant to make our lives easier, fundamentally, right? So whatever niche solution that you're focusing on, I think the ultimate goal there is to not have it become an obstacle, but rather how can it fit within the current lifestyle or the current behavior patterns of your users, right? And in terms of who are perhaps in your case, if the target audience isn't clean on globalization, a good place to start is by empathizing with your users and really understanding why are they not keen, right? Or which part of your solution that you're trying to implement they aren't adopting, and what are their fears around it, right? I think that's always a good place to start, because that'll again help you shape your solution in a way that achieves the goal that you initially set out to achieve, right? Um, yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question. It's a bit broad, but if you need more clarity, I think we can follow up on this too.
Thank you, Arvin. When it comes to incorporating, solutions to a target market, we have another question here on, what are the common challenges faced when it comes to product market fit?
Well, not understanding the problem. That's the biggest common challenge, because we think we have solved the problem, right? We think, okay, we've spent so much time and energy, resources, and R&D to create the perfect solution that solves the problem. When we do actually end up launching the solution, turns out we didn't actually understand the problem. So the solution is not able to solve that problem. That is the number one biggest challenge that we face in product all the time. And that is a direct reflection of how many products get sunsetted, right? If you're talking from a startup point of view, any typical year at a startup, we're launching about 6 to 7 different features or products, right? And now, obviously, not all of them make it. Every year or two, we have to sunset pretty much 80 to 90% of those products, right? And that's pretty much how you get closer and closer to that product market fit. No matter, again, how well you understand the problem or how well your solution is not a guarantee that you will have 100% product market fit. Obviously, it's a very complex element that requires a lot of different collaboration from a lot of different departments and areas, right? So it's usually a trial and error process. But the biggest challenge we face is, again, not understanding the problem, not aligning everyone on the problem, rather focusing only on the solution, right? Which tends to be the most common default behavior when thinking about product building, right? Yeah. Again, fall in love with the problem. That is the biggest challenge. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Arvin. Moving on to our next question. How do we validate the feasibility of our solutions? And what does JDV want to get from the solutions as well?
Aha, interesting questions. Well, first one, how do we validate our solutions? Again, you can implement many ways of rapid testing, right? You can do qualitative testing, you can do quantitative testing, you can do A/B testing, you can do guerrilla testing. And if you're interested in any of these, I mean, feel free to research and find the type of testing that fits you. What's more important is that you find a method of testing that fits you, and not a method of testing that is very generalized, right? Because oftentimes the steps and the procedures might be very complicated, but if it doesn't fit what you're trying to do or your process of building products, then you're more likely to not test at all. And the goal here is to get you to test your products. So find whatever method works for you to validate and test your product. But that's pretty much how you get to feasibility checking, right? And there's practical ways of kind of going about that. There's steps, right? You can start from trying to see if it's technically feasible, then see if your product is conceptually feasible, right? And then maybe see if your product is commercially feasible, right? So it depends on what type of feasibility you're trying to get to. But it all starts from testing, right? And testing is not something that's big or scary. It's essentially just asking users or potential users that your product is targeting, right, on how they feel about the product or how they feel about the solution. So hopefully that'll get you to validate the feasibility of your solutions better. What does JDV want to get from our solutions? Okay. Essentially, I think what the objective of this hackathon is to encourage more fintech solutions within the industry itself. What we have noticed in the past year and a half of doing research is there's a lot of gaps in the market, right? And that's affecting the quality of solutions that are coming out for Malaysians in general. So what we aim to do is kind of gap that bridge, right? Or sorry, bridge that gap, in the sense where we would encourage more fintech solutions to come out of the space, and we would encourage more people to kind of try and solve some of these fintech problems that are emerging and that has not been addressed here, right? Which was the intention of this, primarily the intention of this hackathon. So what we would ideally like to see and encourage all of you is to think big, and also ground yourself, test your solutions, and really see how we can better the industry in Malaysia in general, right? With more solutions that address most of these pivotal problems that people face within fintech, right? And these are very practical problems that affect all of us, right? Access to investment, financial literacy, financial democratization, right? Access to investment platforms, right? How do we make these things better for the population in general? I think this is a small way to kind of ask that question and see what solutions we come up with. But that's initially the intention behind this. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Arvin. Next question here from Zian regarding the customer persona. If a startup serves as a middle person providing solutions for two different parties, does that mean we need to create two different customer personas for both parties?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So oftentimes you'll see that we have businesses that are B2B, right? And then businesses that are B2C, and then businesses that are B2B2C. So you're both merchant facing and i.e. supplier facing and consumer facing, right? And absolutely in that case, you need to understand both of your users, your B2B users and your B2C users as well, right? That means you would have to have a clear understanding of their both parties' pains and gains. And A good example of that would be what Fave is doing. It's an e-commerce that kind of bridged the gap between consumers and merchants as well. So for them, it's very important to understand who their merchants are and what their pains and gains are, as well as who the potential customers are that they're bridging the gap for, right? So it's highly advised that you create two different personas for two different segments, right? So when you're thinking about user personas, maybe perhaps think of it in the sense that every type or category of users that has an access to your platform or your solution, or has a touch point with your access and solution, needs to be understood, right? So if your solution is more service oriented, you need to understand what are the players that are interacting with that solution. Because crafting a user persona is essentially that, right? It's essentially understanding the people and the person that are interacting with your solutions. So in this case, you have your suppliers and you have your consumers. So you need to understand what both of them and how both of them are interacting with your product and what both of them think that their individual problems, frustrations, pains, and gains are. Right? So to summarize, yes, you need to create two different personas, user personas, perhaps not customer personas, unless you're selling to both parties. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you for that, Arvin. Moving on, another question on validation from Kay. Is validation required in a hackathon?
What's required is a kick-ass solution, right? That solves one of the six or two of the six problem statements, right? Validation is not mandatory. It is only advised because if you're wondering whether or not your solution is effective, if you're wondering whether or not your solution is the right solution, uh, quick usability testing or testing in general is a good way to validate that. But is it absolutely mandatory? Absolutely not. What we look at is, again, the effectiveness of your solution and how well that addresses the problem. How you get there is a black box to us, but how we would recommend or how we build products from this side of the industry is essentially using tools to validate our products, right? So it's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended.
Thank you, Arvin. We have a next question from Chintat. Any experiences sharing regarding a ready solution to deal with legal issues? Is it a tough process amongst designing solutions?
Ooh, I am perhaps not the right person to advise in legal issues, but there are a lot of areas in product that we don't have to always build from scratch, right? And there's a lot of tools out there that we can collaborate with, we can integrate with. So perhaps what you might need to confirm or look deeper into is the solution that you're trying to build. Do you need to build all of it from scratch, or can you collaborate with existing platforms out there that is doing the heavy work for you, or the work that you're unable to do for you, right? So if it's dealing with legal issues, is there another platform or another tool that helps you solve that problem, so then you can be a bit more focused on the bigger picture of your solution, right? It is something to consider when you're designing a solution, most definitely. Again, this falls into the feasibility of things, right? But I think one misconception that I'd like to clarify is that all products are built from scratch, and that's not entirely true, right? Innovation, again, itself is not built from scratch, but built on top of something that existed prior, right? And the same goes for product building as well. So do keep an eye out for solutions that you see that are already working, that you can integrate with, that you can collaborate with, that you can take inspiration from, that you can fork even, right, if you're a coder, and that'll help you get to your solution quicker, right? I think, and whenever you're collaborating with solutions, I think obviously that's where you need to run and check for, legal compliances and how willing they are to share their solutions with you. And so that's the research that's required to do so. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you for that. We have come to our final question here by Vignes. A new product to market from a startup often runs into a chicken and egg situation. For instance, needing approval from certain authorities to run their business, but approval from authority is only possible when you have good revenues. What would be a good
Yeah.
strategy to
Yeah.
tackle this?
Very good question. Very good question. So in startups, what we do is oftentimes run moonshot projects, right? So what does that mean? Essentially, moonshots are very, very fun projects to work on because they're experimental projects. What we're trying to do is see if there's a demand in the market. What we're trying to do is see if there's a product market fit for the approvals to come in, for finance to finance the idea, right? For authorities to greenlight the idea. We need some sort of proof. We need some sort of indication that this solution has a potential product market fit. So essentially, how we do that here is by running moonshot projects, right? We will have a very small team dedicated to R&Ding a solution, and we will be rapidly testing that solution. Now, what that means for an individual or even you guys here that have partnered up is essentially to again run a user feasibility check, right? If you see that your product has attraction, it's gaining a lot of eyeballs, then you know people are interested in it. And oftentimes, the easiest way to do that in general is by maybe perhaps creating a lead gen page, right? um, which essentially means you sell your concept, and then you see how many eyeballs you can attract, right? How many people sign up to your newsletter? How many people click on the waiting list? How many people um, are interested in your solution when it eventually launches? So you can still validate the legitimacy of your solution even without having to spend money creating it, by testing it out first, right? Which is why testing is so crucial. And it's not only reserved for the end of your solution, but actually it starts from the concept itself, right? So if you have a concept that you would want to get approval on, or you need financing on, and you need to convince people that this is the right solution, perhaps a good way to start is by actually validating that solution, right? Um, Running some tests, seeing what people think about it, seeing how many practical signups you get for it, and then using that as leverage to basically push your idea through, right? Oftentimes, we face the same here as well when we're building products and solutions, right? To convince stakeholders, we often need to get somewhat of an idea that this is the right solution that we are willing to invest our time and energy building, right? And we do that here through testing and validation. So I would again encourage all of you to really look into testing your ideas and your products, not only at the end of your solution, but all the way from the beginning, from the concept as well. Hope that helps.
All right. Thank you so much, Arvind, for the Q&A session. I think that brings us to the end of the webinar today. Thank you so much, Arvind, for the super insightful session on enhancing problem-solving skills and innovative abilities. It's really interesting to see how we can dissect the problem statements and craft effective solutions through design thinking. And of course, we hope that all hackathon participants will utilize this knowledge as well to address your chosen problem statements in the upcoming hackathon this weekend. Thank you once again, Arvind. Thank you so much.
Pleasure,
And to
pleasure.
all the participants, just a very quick announcement here to all participants. We will be having a team formation session at 3:30 p.m. later. And this team formation session is only open to all individual participants from the open track only that wish to team up with other individuals in order to form teams. All right. So you may enter the team formation session where you will be redirected to a booth, a team formation booth. There will be tables that are opened based on the different problem statements. So you may enter these different tables, interact with other participants, and form teams with them. By the end of the session at 4:30 p.m., you should have your own teams already, 2 to 3 members, and you need to submit your finalized teams in a team formation form by 4:30 p.m. All right. So just a quick recap. This team formation session is only open to individual participants from the open track. Please be sure to join the AirMate session at 3:30 p.m. later. All right. Thank you, everyone. Stay tuned and see you later.
Thanks, everybody.